Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
The analogy is fairly well put together and consistent in that neither Vladimir Putin nor Adolf Hitler were in any way circumspect about their long-term foreign policy goals, about rebuilding a major German empire at the heart of Europe and looking for Lebensraum, an empire based on race and racial inequality, and Vladimir Putin's Russian nationalist desire to recreate the former Tsarist empire and ideally the Soviet Union, if potentially shorn of its Marxist ideology. Nevertheless, publicly they will both say certain things such as, we do not believe in war, we are not the aggressors here, we are more sinned against than sinning, and it's a question of judging them by what they do rather than by what they say, and by judging them on their private reminiscences, be they Mein Kampf, and be they Putin's great essay on his nationalist agenda, and seeing what they also say to their domestic audiences as opposed to what they say when they're occasionally brought before international media. I don't see any way that Munich is rehabilitable, if that's a word. I think that it is not just morally bankrupt, it's strategically inept. It ensures that when Britain and France eventually do go to war, they are having to fight a one-front war as opposed to potentially a two-front war with Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union. It convinces Stalin that the West will always appease Hitler and that his best option, therefore, is to make a deal with Hitler, which is what he begins to do in the spring of 1939, culminating in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The idea that this was Neville Chamberlain playing a clever game, that he was trying to get Britain ready for a war which he knew would happen, is complete balderdash. Neville Chamberlain told his closest associates following Munich that he believed that this was peace for our time. He said it publicly. He wouldn't have given that hostage to fortune had he thought it was only going to be peace for another 12 months. And when he was asked to expedite British rearmament following the Munich Agreement in preparation for this war, which, so his later-day apologists would suggest he was anticipating, he refused, and it took further German aggression, both at home and abroad, for the British to really prepare for war. It's both complex and simple. The complexities of alliances are many and multifaceted, and that is what my book is about. It is about the difficulties of the alliance which ultimately defeated Hitler, which ultimately defeated Imperial Japan, and which ultimately defeated fascist Italy. About how countries which have different political systems, different ideologies, different aims, different imperial records, how they managed to collaborate briefly and successfully, militarily, and to a certain extent laid the foundations for the post-war order. But while that in and of itself and every issue is complex, they did themselves, I think all leaders came back to the central truism, which is something that Churchill repeatedly stated throughout the Second World War, which is that there is only one thing worse than fighting with allies, and that is fighting without them. Nazism could not be defeated without allies, and the great challenges that we face now, not just as the West, but as a planet, from most notoriously climate change, can only be dealt with on a multilateral international basis. There is nothing that a single nation, with the possible exception of the United States and China, can do to solve most of the world's major problems. Generally, I'm of the Kissinger view that it's not that they don't matter, but the practitioners of high-level diplomacy greatly exaggerate their importance. And this is vanity. It's a trap of vanity which statesmen and politicians have fallen into time after time after time. Neville Chamberlain kidded himself that he had managed to exert some sort of influence and built a relationship with Adolf Hitler. Churchill and even more so Roosevelt, kidded themselves at various points of the Second World War that they were developing a genuine comradely relationship based on shared values with Stalin, and we know how that turns out. On the other hand, this early stage of the war where there was a very clear unifying goal and a great danger at various points of the war and debates on strategy, I think it was significant that Churchill did have a good personal relationship with Roosevelt. Not all the way through. It's been much romanticized, and it's too often been seen as consistent. I would say that the Churchill-Roosevelt relationship peaked in the winter of 1942, moving into 1943. But nevertheless, the influence that Churchill had over Roosevelt during the period of 1941, 1942, was, I think, of great importance for Western military strategy, and before that had been of a certain importance in gaining as much aid as possible from the United States for Britain, although Churchill ultimately failed in his policy of trying to drag the United States into war. It was not Churchill's persuasiveness that brought America into war, it was, of course, the Japanese.